humanists of our time. The modern, unbelieving secularists and humanists of our time. They believe that Christianity is the great danger to freedom and good government.
People who reject the very word of God, people who reject the very word of God, people who reject the very word of God.
Welcome to Freethinking 101, brought to you by the Rationalist Society of St. Louis. We challenge you to examine your beliefs, values, judgments, your mindset, biases, and your prejudices, your religion, your philosophy, and your assumptions. In short, to examine the recesses of your mind and defend the cobwebs you have stored there. I'm Earl Myers of the Rationalist Society of St. Louis. Today our guest is Philip Mass, National Chairman of the Robert G. Ingersoll Memorial Committee. Mr. Mass is a clinical social worker in private practice in San Francisco, California. He's also founder and president of the San Francisco American Humanist Association. Mr. Mass is a former St. Louisan who was recently here for a visit. He addressed the Rationalist Society on the life of Robert Ingersoll. The address is being shown in two parts, the second part being shown tonight. May I present Philip Mass.
Hello, I'm very glad to be with you again to talk about Robert Green Ingersoll, one of the great forgotten, but I hope temporarily forgotten, American heroes. Last time I mentioned how he was born in 1833 in Dresden, New York. He died outside of New York City in 1899. I mentioned that he came from a family where his father was a minister, an itinerant minister, but his father Robert Ingersoll gave him the opportunity to think for himself and never stifled his imagination. I also mentioned that he was self-taught. He had some years of formal education, but he was a brilliant person, and he had a photographic memory that stood him in good stead in his later debates with the more radical clergymen of the time. I mentioned too that he had become a lawyer with his brother, and in a relatively short time became famous around the nation, and this continued throughout his lifetime, so he was considered one of the three most sought after and competent lawyers in the country. He was Attorney General of Illinois, the youngest Attorney General in Illinois history at the age of 33. And as I mentioned before, he refused to run for the governorship of Illinois because he was told that if he did so, he'd have to tone down his views on religion. And he refused to compromise in any way with his thoughts and his ideas and ideals, which he said belonged to himself and was not public property. I think one of the remarkable facets of Ingersoll's personality was his ability to take on many, many people at one time, confident that the logic and his reasoning and his argument would win out over the prejudices and the superstitions of the time. I also said that he wrote The Gods, and in The Gods he criticized religion for the fact that there were no proven entities or facets involved, and he gave us reason and science and compassion and human needs that a determining factor in how we approach life. This is what he said about the Bible. I don't throw away the Bible because there's some foolish passages in it, but I say throw away the foolish passages. Don't throw away wisdom because it's found in the company of folly, but do not say that folly is wisdom because it's found in its company. I know that religious people cling to the Bible on account of the good that is in it, and in spite of the bad. I know that freethinkers throw away the Bible on account of the bad in it, in spite of the good. I hope the time will come when the book will be treated like other books and will be judged upon its merits, apart from the fiction of inspiration. Now, from that time on, throughout the rest of his life, that was from about 1873 on, Ingersoll took on the religious leaders of the time, those who interpreted the Bible in a very matter-of-fact and way that indicated that whatever was in the Bible had to be followed. As Ingersoll said, if you really follow the Bible literally, you either wind up in jail or in an insane asylum. He was known throughout the country for his debates with the clergy, especially with the Reverend Talmadge. And these became almost unusual models of debates because both sides presented their views very distinctly. In 1877, while I'm talking about Ingersoll and religion, he took on the 26 fundamentalists in a speech in San Francisco because they had stated that Tom Paine had recanted his beliefs. Tom Paine, as you know, was a critic of organized religion. Even though he was a deist, he was not a Christian. And these fundamentalist ministers said that he recanted. Before an audience of 3,000, Ingersoll had to move from a hall that only held 1,000 because there were so many people who wanted to hear him speak. For that group, he offered $2,000 in gold to anyone who could prove that Tom Paine recanted. No one tried to accept that offer by proving that Tom Paine recanted. In fact, Robert Ingersoll proved that Tom Paine had not recanted by interviewing people who knew of those who were at his deathbed at the time. I've already told you that he was one of the brilliant lawyers. He certainly was one of the brilliant freethinkers of the time. And to him, the most important possession that we had was liberty. There was no one who loved the United States as he did. And he gave many patriotic speeches, which came to a climax in a way, in terms of that facet of his life or period of his life, in 1876, with his plumed knight speech when he nominated James Blaine for President of the United States. It certainly is a classic of seconding speeches, and I think it's on a par with the Lincoln's Gettysburg Address for saying so much in relatively few words. Blaine was not nominated because of other political considerations. From that moment on, Ingersoll became the most popular orator in American history. After that speech, he received 1,000 requests for speaking engagements around the country. For the rest rest of his life, along with his law practice, he lectured on a variety of subjects that ranged from religion, which I referred to and will refer to again, civil rights, and legal matters and political matters. He was one of the great spokespersons of the Republican Party. And he was sought after and was responsible for the election of Republican presidents. But I might add that he was not a conservative Republican. He was an individual and had individualistic ideas about republicanism. He believed in the capitalistic system, but he also believed in the rights of labor. He believed that people should put money aside so that in the September, the autumn, and near the end of their lives, they should be prepared for the December of their lives and not have to go to the poorhouse, but be adequately clothed and sheltered and live their old age in dignity. That didn't happen in the United States until 1935. And so he became, I think, one of the great civil libertarians in American history. He believed in the right of the individual to think and express his views without any inhibitions from political or clerical figures. And he was in hot water many times because of his outspoken message about religion. This is what he said about the matter that was very real at the time, blasphemy in American history. Fortunately, we moved it ahead of that unfortunate situation, being accused of being a blasphemer. But we see it apparent in other parts of the world. And it has relevance, as I say, today, and will in the future, because there are always those who don't want you to question their beliefs. What is blasphemy in one country would be a religious exhortation in another. Blasphemy is the word that the majority hisses into the ears of the few. Each church has accused nearly every other of being a blasphemer. The Catholics called Martin Luther a blasphemer, and Martin Luther called Copernicus a blasphemer. Pious ignorance always regards intelligence as a kind of blasphemy. Some of the greatest men in the world, some of the best, have been put to death for blasphemy. After every argument of the church has been answered, has been refuted, and the church cries, blasphemy. Blasphemy is what an old mistake says of a newly discovered truth. Blasphemy is the bulwark of religious prejudice. Blasphemy is the breastplate of the heartless. The cry of blasphemy means only that the argument of the blasphemer cannot be answered. Blasphemy is what last year's leaf says to this year's bud. But Ingersoll didn't just state the words. He put his beliefs to the test. And in a famous situation in Hoboken, New Jersey, where he was warned if he spoke against the Bible, that it would violate the laws of New Jersey, and that he would be arrested. But he went ahead anyway. Among his hearers were the Reverends Beatty and other clergy, detectives Nelson and Gallagher, Chief of Police Donovan, and a Judge Douglas, all there to detect blasphemy. But what could they do? He studiously introduced blasphemous material in an impishly ironic style. Mind you, I don't say the scriptures are not inspired. On the contrary, I admit that they were in New Jersey. That's in accordance with the statutes, and I'm not foolish enough to fight any statute. You see, if the legislature of New Jersey says a thing, that ends it with me. This is what infidels say. I'm simply repeating it to you. I don't know. If it were not for the Jersey blasphemy statute, I might know. As it is, I don't. The Hoboken parsons know. Ask them. They can tell you all about it. He caustically dealt with ministers in general. Of course, I don't refer to the clergymen of Hoboken because I don't know them. At this point, he paused a long time and brought down the house. Most ministers believe that they're called to their profession, and I've got it in my mind that it's because they haven't got the physical constitution to be wicked. You can't blame them for their views. They get them in sectarian colleges, and sectarian colleges are what might be called the storm centers of ignorance. They, the ministers, come out like the lands on the upper Potomac, as described by John Rogers. Here Ingersoll again paused and pointedly looked at three ministers sitting together, then concluded the sentence, almost worthless by nature, and rendered wholly so by cultivation. Pandemonium now broke out, and it was noticed that even the ministers were laughing, and nobody had the nerve to arrest Ingersoll for blasphemy. Ingersoll was also a great orator. His language, his phraseology were classics, I think, in America. He loved his brother very much. In fact, he said, "He's not just my brother, he's not just my friend, he's my lover." And they wrote letters as though they were very fond of each other. And at his funeral, he wrote one of the great classic speeches of eulogies in any language, anywhere. He loved the beautiful and was with color, form, and music touched to tears. He sided with the weak, the poor, and wronged, and lovingly gave alms. With loyal heart and with purest hands, he faithfully discharged all public trust. He was a worshiper of liberty, a friend of the oppressed. 1,000 times I've heard him quote these words, "For justice all place the temple, and all season summer." He believed that happiness is the only good, reason the only torch, justice the only worship, humanity the only religion, and love the only priest. He added to the sum of human joy, and were every one to whom he did some loving service to bring a blossom to his grave, he would sleep tonight beneath a wilderness of flowers. And what he said about his brother, I think, pertains to himself. He was vilified, but he also was greatly admired. On New Year's Day, hundreds and hundreds of people lined up outside of his house to pay their respects. And quotations of Ingersoll's filled the homes of thousands and thousands of families. He fought for the rights of children. He said, "If I wonder about the rights of women, what shall I say about the rights of children?" When a child tells a lie, don't beat the child. Just tell him you've told many lies yourself, and it's better to tell the truth. He was a great critic of the Old Testament, but he defended the civil rights of Jews. He said that their rights are the same as our own. And he said the constant repetition that the Jews killed Christ is laying the groundwork for further persecution. And he also said that the Germans, the so-called enlightened Germany, treats its Jews like beasts. And he was a great, great defender of the blacks, consistently throughout his life. He sheltered many blacks who were not allowed to stay at hotels in towns where Ingersoll lived, and he took them in willingly. And this is what he said about civil rights and blacks. At the time, in 1883, to an overflow crowd at Lincoln Hall in Washington, D.C., he said that the first duty of the general government is to protect each citizen. The first duty of each citizen is to be true, not to his state. He opposed state rights with regard to civil rights because he said it should be universal, should be a national policy. If this is not now a free government, if citizens cannot now be protected, regardless of race or color, if the three sacred amendments, 13, 14, and 15, have been undermined by the Supreme Court, we must have another, and if that fails, then another. And when we must neither stop nor pause until the Constitution shall become a perfect shield for every right of every human being beneath our flag. And in his beautiful address to the colored people, as he called them at that time, of Rockford, Illinois, he said, "You have been very gentle with us. You've been very understanding with us." He said, I could understand why you would hate white people in terms of what was done to you. But you haven't done that. It's been those who do not have any reason to hate you who are at fault. And he said, the important thing now that you have political rights is that you use our democratic educational system to get ahead. And he said that many years before we heard the phrase, learn, baby, learn. Instead of burn, baby, burn. Ingersoll defended the rights of Chinese. He opposed the Chinese Exclusion Act. He defended the rights of Indians. He defended the rights of every individual. And there was nothing that he valued more than the right of the individual to think for himself or herself. He started a speech one time by saying, the most important thing you can do with what I have to say is to criticize it. He had a creed. He had an idea about how to live. One thing, he had a great sense of humor. And he used his humor to defend himself, but did it in a way that was precious and unique. Fundamentalists had accused his son of getting intoxicated at a dinner party in front of guests, falling under the table and having to be carried out. To which Ingersoll replied, first of all, I do not serve spirits at my table. Secondly, my son did not fall under the table. Thirdly, he was not carried out. And besides, I don't have a son. And that's the way he dealt with anyone who took him on. But his attitude toward life was one of fulfillment. He didn't want to waste time praying to a phantom in the sky, as he called it. Is life worth living? Well, I can only answer for myself. I like to be alive, to breathe the air, to look at the landscape, the clouds, the stars, to repeat old poems, to look at pictures and statues, to hear music, the voices of the ones I love. I love eating and smoking. You wouldn't say that now. I like good cold water. I like to talk with my wife, my girls, my grandchildren. I love to sleep and to dream. And he said in another context, and spread imagination's wings. Yes, you can say that life, to me, is worth living. When I was a boy, I killed 2 ducks, and it hurt me as much as anything I ever did. No, I would not kill any living creature. In his creed, which he expressed in many ways, I think is summarized in this statement. To love justice, to long for the right, to love mercy, to pity the suffering, to assist the weak, to forget wrongs and remember benefits, to love the truth, to be sincere, to utter honest words, to love liberty, to wage relentless war against slavery in all of its forms, to love wife and child and friend, to make a happy home, to love the beautiful in art and in nature. And he said one time, let us keep allusions to the world of the arts. That's where they flourish, and that's where they should be. And let's keep reality to our everyday life, exclusive of the arts. We should cultivate the mind, to be familiar with the mighty thoughts that genius has expressed, and the noble deeds of all the world, to cultivate courage and cheerfulness, to make others happy, to fill life with the splendor of generous acts and the warmth of loving words, to discard error, to destroy prejudice, to receive new truths with gladness, to cultivate hope, to see the calm beyond the storm and the dawn beyond the night, to do the best that can be done, and then to be resigned. And so tonight I brought you a picture of Robert Ingersoll. The best I can do, or hope for, is to whet your appetite, that you may want to learn more about the man who not only espoused principles, but lived his life according to them. He loved his family. He was devoted to the brothers and sisters who raised him when his mother died when he was only 2 years old. He respected his father, but he said, you don't honor your parents by repeating their mistakes, so he had no hesitancy to strike off on his own. He lived a happy life.